Anybody do anything exciting this weekend? Okay. You went what?
Caving.
You went caving? I've only done that once. It was not for me, but that's awesome.
Yeah, I got in because I'm realizing I'm like the tiniest bit claustrophobic at a really bad time. But it was pretty cool. It was in Worley's Cave in eastern Tennessee.
Oh, cool. I did that once. So when I was was involved in my outing club in college, and one of the trips I went through the trip leader training, and so it was all the trip leaders. So we were pretty outdoor savvy anyway. But the weekend we were supposed to go backpacking, the mountains were on fire. It was way back when, it was one of the years when we had major wildfires. Not the one a couple of years ago. I'm older than that. So way back in the early 2000s, Mount Mitchell was just ablaze. So we went caving instead and spent the night in the cave, and it was intense. Yeah, it was a lot. I didn't love it.
Because it's just
It's cool for a few hours.
At all, it's just total darkness.
Yeah.
And I forgot to post it again. I need to sort of.
So we're gonna go and get started pretty soon. This might be about it. So you guys have probably noticed, if y'all don't know Erin Adair, she's our distance ed, I don't know, what do you call, what's your title, Erin?
It's kind of in flux right now, actually. I think it's going to be online distance education coordinator.
Okay,
So that's
excellent.
what I'm doing.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Good. That sounds like more, hopefully. Anyway, she's wonderful, and she's filming me because most of your classmates aren't here, and so we're just going to post this on Moodle. So you don't really need to do anything different. I just get to be self-conscious about being filmed. That's all. But I'll probably just kind of we'll make this. I mean, it's pretty informal most days, but we'll just go through the lecture notes that Danielle was kind enough to prepare. Hopefully you guys feel like she's been doing a good job. Feel free to give me feedback on her or just the class in general. I know I'm not sure how that is for you when you sign up for a class and you're like, oh, I thought the professor was teaching and it's a PhD student. But I think she's good. I've been showing up to monitor, so feel free to give us feedback on the class at any point. I'll just say that while she's not here, because I do mean it. Because part of my job is to make sure she's ready to go do my job somewhere else, right? So we want to make sure she's doing a good job in here, and that you guys are getting what you need, obviously. So today, here's what we'll do. I have just a couple of reminders for you, and then by the end you should be able to do this stuff. We're going to be going over AV programs, so it's really similar to giving a talk. So hopefully last class Danielle kind of gave you the steps to constructing your live talks, and today would be the steps for constructing your podcasts. So remember, you can choose to do one or the other of those, or if you work with a community partner, it could be a hybrid, but we can talk about that too. So, hey Tanner, here are some things to keep in mind. So February the 18th, so that's a week from today, your Photoshop tutorials are going to be due, all right? So those are already posted to Moodle. Please have some patience with us on those. They are meant to pull you through these Adobe suites, and we do our very best to update them. But as you know, slightly different versions of Adobe, or if we have a slightly different version, or we're trying to update it from the year, there might be little tweaks. But you should just kind of get the gist of what we're hoping that you'll be able to get through. So on the tutorials, it has you watch some videos either through the Adobe suite or through YouTube. So if the link's broken, just try to find something comparable. The goal of that is just to sort of prep you for lab so that you get some sort of introduction to the Adobe suite. If there are things broken, feel free to email us, but just kind of do your best hopefully everything will work perfectly. I don't want to just shoot ourselves from the foot from the beginning. But anytime we're trying to come up with a step-by-step things with software that changes all the time, it's just a little difficult to stay ahead of it. So do your best on those. But those are going to be due on February 18th. So that just means you need to take some time. I would imagine you may want to set aside a little bit more time than you typically do for this class, which I'm assuming is not a ton of prep usually. I'd set aside a couple hours just to be safe to get through all those tutorials, but the tutorials will be due a week from today. Okay, so questions on those? because we'll start getting into that in lab. We'll be meeting the computer lab to work through some of the Adobe Suite stuff. Also on the 18th, so those tutorials are due, but I want you to bring with you your draft outlines or your draft storyboard. So hopefully by the 18th you have some sense of whether you're going to do a live talk or a podcast. And if you're doing a live talk, you're going to bring an outline. If you're doing a podcast, bring a storyboard. Yes, Tanner.
For the Photoshop thing,
Uh-huh.
can we use our own laptops and computer lab? Or do we use
If you have the Adobe Suite on your laptop, you're welcome to do that, but likely you do, I mean, unless you have some reason to, you probably are gonna have to do it in the computer lab. It's not something typical, it's not like a standard thing that comes with Apples or whatever.
Okay.
Usually you'll probably have to use the computer lab. And then your first exam is on Wednesday. Okay, so remember that. I think last time people were asking about a study guide. We don't really do study guides, but I think as Danielle mentioned, if you go back through the lectures and you write down all of these learning objectives, that is your study guide essentially. Just make sure you can do all that stuff, and then you should be totally fine. Okay, we don't do anything like tricky. All the questions come pretty much straight from these learning objectives. So just do the work to go back and make sure you know all this stuff. And I think I mentioned last time, Danielle and I are education nerdy enough to like pay attention to Bloom's taxonomy, if that makes if that, you know what that means or that means anything to you. But these verbs mean something, right? So list the 5 steps. We literally want you to be able to list things, right? Identify, we want you to identify stuff. If it says explain or apply, that probably connotes something a little bit more deeper, all right? So just pay attention to those. It's not rocket science. Just go through the objectives, make sure you can do all that stuff, and you should be just fine. So it will be a mix of short answers, and yeah, it's just like a little short essay test that will happen on Wednesday, okay? Questions on that? All right. Oops. Okay. So today we're going to focus on audiovisual programs. So a lot of the same stuff is going to apply from your talks to your podcasts. So a little bit of review. Who remembers what the 2-3-1 rule is? That was a reading quiz last week that a lot of people did not do well. You guys remember what the 2-3-1 is? Yeah. Okay.
You're supposed to do the middle first, and then the conclusion, and then the introduction, and you outline
Yeah.
the talk.
Yeah, that's a suggested method anyway. I mean, that's not set in stone. You aren't like wrong if you start from the beginning. But the 2-3, why might that be helpful?
Because you know where you're going with the talk.
Uh-huh.
It'll be easier to like not mess up the intro.
Yeah.
Everything else.
Yeah.
You know, you can't go.
Yeah, good. What were you gonna say?
Basically
the same thing. Yeah, so it's good to like focus what the meat of your talk is first, and then you can know how to set it up well, right? Because as we talked about before, like a well-crafted intro is really important because it helps like gain the attention and get buy-in from your audience that they actually want to stick around and pay attention, right? So if you know where you're going, you can set it up so that people hopefully are a little bit more engaged. That may be one method for capturing and maintaining attention. How else might we do it?
You could tell like a personal story
Mm-hmm.
that they might be able to relate to or find entertaining.
Yep. Good. Anything else?
Visuals
Uh-huh.
or like pictures, or actually have something in hand that they can see.
Yeah, good. Anything else you can think of? Capturing or maintaining attention.
It personally relevant to them.
Those poetry principles, a lot of those are meant for capturing and maintaining attention. Yep, making things personally relevant. Using humor when appropriate, right? You don't want to like offend people. And if you're just not funny, don't force it, right? So using humor is good. Usually laughing at yourself works pretty well too. What visual aids, so we use them to maintain or capture attention, but what kinds of things do you need to think about when you're thinking about what you want to do for your visual aids?
Not to, I guess, make sure you give them back, or like they're not so stimulating that they take away from attention towards it, and just completely walk into that and forget about what you're saying.
Totally. Good. Anybody else have another thing to add on that? Yep.
They need to be really easy to understand because people aren't going to put effort into understanding a complicated figure.
Yeah, good. So a lot of times in interpretation settings, we're talking about informal learning context, which is just a fancy way of saying people are choosing to be there, right? So you want to make sure that they continue to choose to be there. So a lot of times when people are in leisure activities, they don't, like this setting is not particularly interpretive because, I mean, while I don't have you locked in here, you're kind of coerced to be here, right? Because you're in class and there's a requirement and you kind of have to listen to me. This is not really informal learning, right? Because you have other motivations for being here besides just like, I'm so interesting, right? But when you're interpreting, you gotta be just that interesting that people want to stick around. So yeah, you want it really, really easy to understand. You want it like flashy enough that people are into it, but not so flashy that that's all they want to pay attention to. Uh-huh.
Also, going off what you said, the ranger that came in, he said that he left the things up there and he would pass them out, or like you could come up afterwards so that you're paying attention.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah, that's a good like classroom management kind of technique too. Yes. Yeah. So he did a great job, right? Like he had stuff that we could see, but he didn't come in here and was like, who wants to see, all this stuff? Because then you guys would have just been petting the, whatever he had, all the skins and not paying attention to what he said. Good. Okay, cool. Is this working? Okay. So AV programming, so meaning like stuff that's not in person but sort of in person, like videos and like video podcasts. Why might we want to use this as an interpretive technique? Like, what are the benefits?
Well, maybe like you can prepare better and if you miss some, you can start over and it's not quite as intimidating as like standing up in front of people and speaking.
Okay, good. Yes, so like you have some. If you're planning ahead, right? You have some time to get it exactly right. Yeah, good. Tanner, what are you going to say?
You can reach a much larger audience.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I was just going to say it's like reusable. You don't always have to be consistent to it.
Right. Like it may take a lot of like initial investment, but once it's there, and you can just like email it to people or put it on your website or tweet it out, right? And you don't have to keep doing it over and over and over and over. Okay, good. So what are some challenges to it then? Why wouldn't everybody just do that? Uh-huh.
It's not interactive, so you can't like give feedback.
Yeah, good. So like, so for instance, if I were filming this just in my office, I find that really, really difficult, right? Like giving a lecture when I don't have people to give feedback to me. I feel like it's just, I hate doing that essentially, because you just need, it's like having feedback. If you can understand if your audience is understanding you, if they're connecting with stuff, you can kind of riff on that. It's a little bit more give and take. Good. Other stuff? Mm-hmm.
People might be less motivated to watch it the whole way through.
Yeah.
Like, if there's someone else telling you stuff, you feel kind of socially obligated to sit there and listen.
Totally. So you guys are obligated to be in here for a lot of different reasons, right? But if we imagine we're like at a park setting and I'm just like a ranger giving a talk, even in that setting, right, most people would think it would be rude, right? Or like some people, even they like anticipate they might want to slip out, you're probably not going to sit at the front, right? Because there's some social, like, it's just like not nice to get up and leave in the middle of a talk, right? So yeah. So a podcast, there's like no pressure for that, so you might lose people. Good. Those are all good points. Yeah, those are many of the points that I wanted to make. So as far as drafting these things, you've probably picked up a lot of interpretive stuff. This is not like particularly difficult. It's all pretty logical, but kind of you do the same thing you would in a talk. So you would draft what you're going to say. You plan your storyboard. Do you guys know what a storyboard is? Or guess maybe what a storyboard might be?
It's just
What's
a
that?
board that has like each frame.
Mm-hmm.
So it just tells you how the story is going to go
Yeah,
along
how
for
the
your
story
video.
is going to go. It
Yeah.
basically matches. It's like an outline with pictures, essentially. So it just matches up what people are going to see, what they're going to hear, so you have a general sense of how it's going to go. So you would draft your script, draft your storyboard, get the images you want. You want to make sure that you can use them, right? For a class assignment, you don't have to worry so much about copyright. No one's going to really track you down. But if you were doing this professionally, you certainly want to get copyright. And really, you should do it for class too. But produce the soundtrack. Same thing if you're using songs, you want to make sure you have copyright for those, and then put it together. Right? So it's not rocket science, right? When you're drafting the script, it's going to be really similar to planning your talk. All right. So let's review that. What do? You say, I want to give a talk on salamanders, or I want to give a talk on whatever. So Danielle talked about 10 steps. I've got them written down as a cheat sheet. But let's see if we can remember all the things that we do to plan a talk.
Consider your audience.
Consider your audience. That wasn't one of the things that wasn't one of the magical 10 things I've written down. But yeah, of course, you wanted to consider your audience. Like, who is this for? That will guide how your talk goes, right?
You want to figure out what the main points of your topic are going to be.
Yes. Okay. So figure out your main points. Even before that, you pick a topic, right? So you just say, when I say do a talk, Taylor, you're like, okay, well, let's pick something, right? So you pick a topic. You settle on your main points or your objectives, like what you want people to get out of this, right? So give me a topic. Can somebody give a topic? Ospreys, right? And so Tanner, that you could do a talk on a lot of different stuff about ospreys, right? So could you think of one thing that you want people to know or feel about ospreys? Their migration patterns. Okay, so we could do a lot of different things, but if we're going to do a talk, you focus on, all right, when people come out of this talk, I want them to know more about their migration patterns. Right, so that's your objective. Same thing as those learning objectives, right? So it just focuses, this is what I want people to get out of this. I want them to know this, I want them to feel this, etc. Or I want them to do this, right? So you could have behavioral objectives even. Like I want people after this talk to give money to a Osprey Foundation or whatever, right? Maybe you want them to know about migration and give money. It could be, you could think of different objectives, right? And they could be kind of whatever you want. And then based on that, you're going to develop your theme. Okay, so if you're focused on migration patterns, hopefully your theme has something to do with migration, right? So you develop your theme, figure out what your theme statement might be. What do you do after that? You've got your theme. Any thoughts? Yeah, yep.
So start working on the body and then
Yeah.
the order of which
Right.
points come.
Yep. We'd start working on the body. Suggestion pre-step is maybe writing a summary paragraph. So it's sort of like a similar, sort of an outline of the whole thing. And then you dig into your body. Once you write your body, what do you do next? 2, 3, 1 more rule. Conclusion, right? What do you want people to walk away with? And then what do you write? Your introduction. And then you'd rearrange it. And then you practice it. And then maybe you come up with your title at the end. Sometimes.
It's easier to start with the conclusion in some situations.
Sure. I mean, these are like suggested. I mean, it's like when you learn to write a 5-point essay in elementary school, right? Or whenever you learn how to do that, they there's like a method to teaching it, and a 2, 3, 1 rule works for many people. But yeah, I think it's not the interpretation police are not going to come get you if you write the conclusion first. Sure. And I think a lot of times it makes sense to kind of begin with the end in mind, is what they would say with backwards design. So yeah, you figure out what people are going to get out of it. Good. Questions on that? So but with the difference with an AV is obviously people are going to be seeing and hearing stuff too. That's a little bit different from people just talking, right? So what can you say with pictures and sounds instead of words? Sometimes, use the medium to your advantage. And so transitions when you're giving a talk are super important. If you're doing a podcast, you might be able to use that with music or visuals. All right, we'll talk about some examples in a second. So once you've drafted some other considerations when drafting the script. Particularly if you're writing this for someone else, if you're writing it for yourself, you can kind of get away with skimping on some of this because you have in your head sort of how it's supposed to go. But if you were going to write it for someone else, you'd want to use things like ellipses or emphasis on the words so that they know where to put their inflections, right? And so, there you go. You can, if you were going to read that, right? Welcome to the Rocky Bridge Pocket Ranger Tour. And that paw, it just means a pause there. Today you'll learn about the amazing world of Lycan, right? So writing it makes it so that the narrator knows what to do. All right, you write to the I. So you're going to keep your visual images in mind, which is why it's important to do the storyboard, so that when you're writing your script, you kind of know what people are going to see, so that you can kind of point things out in the picture, capitalize on the things that are visual. So you might say, fungi is a marriage of fungus and algae, and here you can see the algae is all by itself, and the fungi is farther up the log, etc. Right? So you write to the I. You also write to the ear, right? So you write it for it to be heard, and you're going to say your script. You don't read it, right? So, like when you're giving a talk, you typically do an outline. You don't write word for word. And many of you, I'm sure, have seen speakers where they've written out their speech and they read it word for word, and it just it's fine, but it's not as good as people are talking off the cuff, right? But for a podcast, especially if you're hiring a narrator, you don't have really that luxury. You kind of have to write the way that you would talk, which is pretty different than if we were going to just write down exactly what I'm saying. It's a different style, right? So you write to the ear. Did any of y'all take drama out there? Drama growing up? Do you take any drama now? Sort of, maybe. All right. So if you're a drama student, you would know that they teach you how to be extra dramatic, right? When you're on stage, right? Or just the next time you watch TV and you listen to how people are saying, or especially in commercials, they talk like everything is the greatest ever. And when you're just watching on a commercial, it doesn't come off as strange, right? But that's kind of the way that you would do a podcast, is you want to put in some emotion, even if it feels silly when you're saying it. On screen, it's going to come off as more interesting. Okay, so let's give an example. All right, so let me get this to come up. Hopefully it will work. This is an example of a video podcast. Oh, hopefully it'll work. All right, let me. So when we're reading it, you might want to jot down these notes because I'll ask you these questions afterwards. So what do you think the theme statement is? I'm not sure what I meant by what do you expect. Okay, so how does this write to the eye, and how does this write to the ear? Let's just focus on those three. So what do you think the theme is, and how is this smartly kind of using visuals, and how is this smartly using sounds? Oh, come on. Sound, no. Hopefully this is going to work. Aaron, you have any ideas?
Maybe check the little thing over here.
This is all the way up. Uh-uh. No, I don't. Well, wah wah. We can.
Is the master volume on the computer up, on the keyboard?
Yeah. That's a good call.
It is?
Yeah, it is.
Is there another link to that video that's not on the PowerPoint? Can you put it into?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
If you right click on it, does it give you some info?
I think it's just embedded in the.
Might have lost the sound when I put it in there.
That's true. You can try save media as and then try to move it up on the computer.
Sorry, you guys. We're just doing downloads.
If that doesn't have sound, then it might be.
Yeah.
That's it.
All right, well, that's okay. I think actually I have some other examples of things I was going to weave in if we have time. So we'll just save that. Let me see. Well, we'll come back. I'll come back to that little activity because I've got some backups in a second. All right. So. All right, so storyboards. So I'm going to show you some examples of some aspects of them. So if you're doing a podcast, this is the type of thing that we're hoping you're going to bring to lab next week. Okay, so it's a draft of these. So you're going to have your script and then paired with images, right? And then every time you have it, so Taylor was saying like every frame, so it's not like every single frame of the whole movie, right? That would be insane. But basically every time that there's a scene change, you'd have a break, right? So with a break of idea, usually you'd break your scene too. So things that you'd want to think about when you're selecting images. So what actually needs to be explained visually, right? So what do we need to know? Where am I? And what... and the key is just giving the script a visual dimension. So, and always give credit, despite what I just said before. So types of images, so you could think of images, well, many different ways, but kind of other categories would be being kind of a literal representation. So if you're giving a podcast about RCW, the red-cockaded woodpecker, you might show longleaf pine ecosystems because that's where they live. Right? So that's more of like a literal representation, right? Or if you're talking about a really popular place, you might just give an image of people standing in line, right? So that means that's a place where a lot of people come, right? It doesn't even have to be that particular monument, right? So you can think of visuals in those sort of literal and figurative senses. You could also do images like graphs, right? And that's when you want to just be, emphasizing a relationship. You kind of want to be careful with graphs. Why might you be careful using graphs?
Accuracy.
What?
Accuracy.
Yeah, accuracy.
If you don't want a complicated graph.
Yeah, you don't want something that's super complicated, right? Remember, people are not, they're kind of watching these things for fun, right? So you don't want to make people think too hard, right? Not to undersell your audience too much. But graphs, unless they're like super clear, like this is the way that you're going to describe them, or this is like the best way to describe what you want to see, sometimes you want to be careful with that. Or just symbolic stuff, right? So if you're saying seasons, maybe you just have pictures of trees in different seasons. Also, music is super important. I took a film music class in college, and I learned more than I ever wanted to know about this, but it was really, really interesting, right? So thinking about how music really enhances what you're seeing. So you can have, these are the common places where you typically have music, but the type of music can really enhance your image. So major versus minor keys. Who's a musician in here? Do you guys know what that means? I say some like, oh, what does that mean? So major keys are usually like kind of bright, happy things, where minor keys usually denote kind of like sadness or even scary. You can also use a technique called like a leitmotif, which sounds really fancy, but it's essentially when you take the same like clip of music and use it throughout maybe I didn't link to this. You would use it to kind of signify the same theme throughout, your segment. So like a good example might be Star Wars, right? There was like a resurgence, so hopefully some of you guys have seen Star Wars. I see some nods, at least enough to know what I'm talking about. Okay, so in Star Wars, everybody can probably think of like Darth Vader's theme, right? The dun 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 dun. See what I mean? Like every time you hear that, you can see Darth Vader, right? Because they use it every single time he appears. That's a leitmotif. That's Darth Vader's theme. Or that da 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 da. That is, who is that? Jedi, right? Right. So that's Luke Skywalker's theme, right? And so you can think Luke Skywalker is a major theme, so that is happy and heroism, where Darth Vader is ooh, scary. And it depends on the instruments you use. Like if you, I'm gonna go deep nerd. This is from my film music days. When in Star Wars, if you ever watch it again, you'll notice that da 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 in the beginning of the movie when he's like in the desert, doesn't even know who he is, or that he's like all special, is going to save the galaxy and all that. It's like these, he'll have like a single French horn, right? And it's like very melodic and it's kind of like aspirational. But then by the end, when he's like saving people, it's full on trumpets, like full on brass section, right? And that denotes like more like, you know, drama and all of that. So music can do a ton to how people are experiencing your podcast, right? So you don't have to go get a degree in film music, but paying attention to what you have, and some of it's just intuitive. We've been watching TV and movies so long, you'll kind of know. You're like, oh, that sounds like a hero song, or oh, that sounds like this. But it really helps kind of bring it together. All right. When you're selecting images, you want to like look at your mind. Just think when you're selecting images, just kind of what's going to match up well with your words, right? Like make sure you're viewing what you were thinking about when you're saying these words. Kind of start there. Like when you're planning your script, you usually have pictures in your mind of what that would look like, and see if you can find images that match that. But you want to make sure you can use them, like you have permission to use them. And then, how many of you guys have played around with GarageBand? Has anybody played around with it? So it's a Mac software. You don't have to use it, but if you're doing a podcast, this is what we recommend. We've got some tutorials to help you with it, but it's very, very easy. You essentially just like drop some sound files in there, and you can speed it up and slow it down and stretch it out and get everything to line up. And it's really, really easy to use and overlay images. It's pretty intuitive, which is nice. And then when you're producing the soundtrack, so most of you are probably not going to be hiring narrators, but if you were, you'd maybe be looking at possible narrators and selecting one. So my husband does a lot of distance ed over in food science. I feel like nobody in this class, but I feel like one of my former students is like, oh, take your other, your husband's class. So he does a lot of distance ed, and so he gets narrators. They hire narrators to do their to do their voiceovers, and they'll get these actors and they can impersonate like who's the guy from The Dirtiest Jobs?
Mike Rowe?
Yeah, Mike Rowe. Like there are these people that can kind of impersonate different types of voices, and so they would like as a team sit around and get the actors to do different voices and figure out which voice they wanted to use for their particular one. An example would be, let me pull up. This is what I was thinking of.
I charge $20 an hour.
Okay, thanks, Tanner. Why this? Okay. Oh, this is the ad. Okay, I was like, why isn't this? This isn't working either. Okay, I understand. This is an ad. Hopefully the sound will work. It's not working either. Okay, this is YouTube. This isn't my fault. I don't know what's going on. That's so strange. Well, what I wanted to show you was, did you guys watch Blue Planet or Planet Earth and like growing up? So there was David Attenborough was the original narrator, and then they got Sigourney Weaver to do it. No diss against Sigourney Weaver, but I think David Attenborough was like a much better fit. And I was going to show you two side-by-sides just to like illustrate the point of the narrator really does change the feel of the whole thing. And I'm kind of bummed we can't listen to it because I was excited about that. But anyway, you get the point, right? You can imagine different people bringing a different feel to it, the way that you say it. Whoops. And then I'll just say again, so like the same thing I was saying before about like commercials. Like if you were taking acting classes, you might feel super awkward kind of being that dramatic. But it really does make a difference on these podcasts. Like you might feel awkward saying it with a lot of inflection, but it does really make a difference from the finished product, rather than like reading a script monotone. People aren't going to love that. So you want to rehearse the script a lot, like over and over again, and the more you rehearse it, the more conversational hopefully it will become. So you don't want to sound like you're reading a script, ideally. Why isn't this going? All right, so you want to use the music is going to help create the mood and provide some continuity throughout the piece. So it's an important piece to it. Also, be aware of copyrighted music and sounds. Musicians get really, really sensitive about that. And then iMovie really has made it super, super easy to link up all of these images. So don't be intimidated by this if you feel like you're not a tech person. It really is pretty user friendly. So don't feel like that has to be a barrier to producing your video podcasts. So this is an example of a storyboard. This is kind of like similar level of detail to what we're hoping that you'll bring next week. So the way that these are going to go, these outline and so I want you to bring your outlines for a live talk or your podcast or your storyboards if you're going to do a podcast next week. Bring as much detail as you can, minimally about this much. All right, we want to see that you've done something to get some credit. But the more detail you're allowed to bring, or you can bring, the more useful feedback hopefully you'll get from your peers and us. Like spoiler, we're going to do some peer evaluation of these things so you can give each other some pointers. So the more stuff you have on there, the more feedback people are going to be able to give you. All right, so bring as much detail as you can, but this is something similar to what you might bring. And as far as storyboards, sometimes it does work better for people to hand draw them. If you want to do it on PowerPoint, if you have the actual images and stuff picked out, that's great. Basically, the more information you can give us, the better. What I don't want you to do is just scribble something on a piece of paper right before lab. So try to put some effort into it so that we can give you some feedback. All right, questions? No? All right. So real quick, we're doing great on time. That's what happens when your videos don't work. Hopefully you guys read this stuff, right? Is this looking familiar? These papers that you were supposed to read before class? Oh wait. There, this paper, right? It was about the Canyonlands National Park. They did a video podcast. They had 3 treatments. One was an online podcast through their website. One was a podcast in the visitor center, so they just did the video in the visitor center, and then the one was the in-person ranger talk. Do you guys remember anything about what they found? We'll go over some, but curious to know if you picked up stuff from the paper. Yeah, Caitlin.
The people who did the in-person ranger talk were more dedicated to sustainability. I think that's the word they used, but the people who did the online podcast retained, I think, just an emotional amount of knowledge.
Yeah. Okay. So people may have learned more from the video, but been more committed to behavior change or sustainability or supporting conservation if they actually saw it in person. Okay. Good. Anything else? You guys remember? All right, well, here's kind of what they said, was that online was better than the visitor center, all right? So people kind of got more out of it if they're watching the same video at home rather than at the visitor center. Why do you think that might be?
I feel like when you go to a visitor center and watch a movie, a lot of times people go in there and they use that as a time to rest, especially in a national park. They go inside because they're hot or something. Also, or just tired.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people do blank out with stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that seems right to me. But then the talk was better than the podcast on a lot of these measures. So why might that be?
I feel like people just being there in general, listening, they're going to have more of a personal, desire to be there and to learn more because they've actually put themselves and put the effort to be there versus just, having time, being able to just listen to it.
Yeah. Okay.
Or
Good.
watch a podcast.
Good.
I feel like you're less inclined to be distracted too. If you're at home or have someone else going around you, you're just going to pay attention to that a little bit.
Yeah.
Whereas the talk, you're more engaged.
More engaged. Yeah. Typically, people an instructor can be a little more responsive to the audience, right? And if they're losing them, they can pull them back in, right? And then you also have the benefit of just people don't want to be rude, so they kind of pay attention. And also though, Taylor, I think maybe it was, I forget which one of you, we're talking about just people visiting versus people online. How do you think there might be different difference between those two audiences? People who are watching a video versus visiting a park? Probably, right? So it's one of the just limitations of these like observational surveys, is you don't know which caused the other, right? So they say that like people are more committed to kind of behavior change and sustainability if they saw a talk. Well, they might be more committed just because they like took the time to visit the park too, right? So it's just something to consider. Okay, cool. So essentially one thing I pull out of this though is just how close all of these outcomes are, all right? So that's just something to consider, is that audiovisual programs seem to have a place, right? As far as, like they may not be quite as effective as talks, but when you're considering the audience reach and how many people you're able to reach with these videos, you're getting like pretty similar outcomes across the board. So that's kind of cool, right? So maybe don't do away with your Ranger talks. They're really, really important, but having a video podcast might be a great way to reach new audiences and get similar outcomes. Jeez. Okay. All right, so here are the things that you needed to do from today. And so a reminder, just go through these PowerPoints, list all of the learning objectives, and make sure you can do them by Wednesday. And hopefully we'll both be here. Danielle, as I was telling you, send her good vibes. She's off interviewing for her very first on-campus faculty job, first on-campus interview for a faculty gig, and it's up in Illinois, and she had a lot of trouble getting there with the snow, and she's not sure she'll get back, but one of us will be here administering the exam on Wednesday, if not both. And if you have questions in the meantime, you can feel free to ask me. Mm-hmm.
I assume the test is going to be like short answer questions.
Yeah.
Not terribly long because it's
Yeah, it's designed to be completed. Usually, so my experience with this class is that people will, like a handful will finish up within like half an hour. Most people use almost the whole time, and a handful usually need a little bit more time, and that's fine if you do. I don't really have a problem with it. We're not going to give you another 2 hours, but another 15 minutes that's fine. Tanner, did you have something? She's having it today, right? So send her some positive vibes up there. Let's get this girl a job. Anybody else? Any other questions? No? All right, well, this was delightful. You guys enjoy the free 10 minutes, and I will see you Wednesday.